So this is day 16 of the videos that I'm making to help raise understanding and awareness of PTSD, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about delayed PTSD and also a few other types of trauma that sort of tie into this very loosely. So delayed PTSD isn't something that's a formal thing. However, what it is when there is a gap between the initial trauma and actually someone starting to experience elements of PTSD, so be that flashbacks or nightmares or intrusive thoughts. And sometimes that gap can be months and sometimes it can be years. And when it's months, quite often what's happened is there's been a trauma and a crisis along with that, where people have had to be very focused on dealing what's in front of them and getting through that incident or that situation. And so their brain is just very focused on, this is what I have to deal with. And it's as they come out of that situation and they can start to just kind of take a breath, that's when their brain might start to try and process this, and that can be then what starts to trigger or initiate those PTSD type experiences. In terms of it being years later, quite often what happens then is people have coped with the initial trauma and kind of partially dealt with it and partially maybe shoved it away a little bit, and then there is a second incident which in and of itself may never have been a problem had there not been this initial trauma already kind of waiting. And so it's that combination of a trauma that's happened earlier on that's been partially dealt with, partially put aside, and then a later one that almost acts as a trigger, and that can then cause this delayed reaction to the trauma that can be years later. But also it could be that someone has just dealt with the trauma and that's fine. It doesn't mean, not getting PTSD straight away. It doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to get it later on. Absolutely not. It's just something that people experience, and I just wanted to put that in this so that if people are kind of going, but it was years ago, yes, that can happen, and it's a really difficult thing, but it's not that there's something wrong with you or anything like that. It's actually something that we know and recognise. Along with that, people can get what might be termed accumulated trauma, whereby quite often this will be people who work in sort of emergency services and are exposed to lots of traumas but aren't involved in them directly, as in it's happening to them directly, and they manage it, but over time it's like a drip effect until there is something that just is too much, and then lots of other incidents that they've seen or been involved in then start to emerge in this quite traumatic way, along with the, again, initiating incident. So you can get this sort of like accumulation effect for people generally who are working in situations where they're going to see a lot of trauma. Along with that, you can get what's called vicarious trauma, whereby you're not exposed to the traumatic incident, but there's still that feeling of helplessness and inability to do anything. So 999 callers, for example, but anyone who is having to see someone go through trauma themselves can get this vicarious or second-hand trauma, and that is absolutely something people can experience, and is every bit as difficult for them as for the person who experienced the trauma. And alongside that, you can get something called moral injury, where people have had to make impossible decisions, that the battlefield surgeon who has to decide which person to save, where whatever you choose, someone will be damaged by your action or by your inaction, and that can lead to a moral injury because there is no right answer. So that's just, it's always worth holding in mind these different things that can be going on. So that's just a little bit around delayed PTSD, vicarious trauma and moral injury, and I'll see you tomorrow.